JJ, this is Rita. Are you waiting for something?
Yes, I just wanted to give a little bit more time. I wanted to make sure everyone was on.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Correct, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Cleaver is the host. I will be administering the meeting. Thank you. That is correct, sir. I will be running the meeting. Mr. Cleaver is the host per PSBA guidelines. And it's the ones we're following for this meeting, as most of the school districts in the state have done the same thing. Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
I believe I did receive notification that Joy and Rusty will not be in attendance for this meeting. Okay, Mr. Stern, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Gail, can you hear me? I just want to make sure you're online. I see it connecting to audio. She should be in a minute. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your patience. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the regular school board meeting from Lehigh Area School District, which is virtual, to order on April 27th at 7:08 p.m. Roll call, please, Mrs. Wagner.
Sure. Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Beltz, absent. Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Foeller.
Here.
Mr. Stephen Holland. Maybe I have to unmute. Mr. Stephen Holland. Okay. Mrs. Gail Mahalik. Mrs. Rita Spinelli.
Here.
Mr. Wayne Wentz.
Here.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Here.
Okay. One more time, Mrs. Gail Mahalik.
Here.
Okay. Mr. Stephen Holland.
Here.
Okay, so 7 present, 2 absent.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Just as a note, a trial run with the Zoom meeting was held on Wednesday, the 22nd of April at 6 p.m. No business was conducted, no roll call was taken, no agenda was published. It was just for the accessibility and capabilities for our members and to log on to the Zoom meeting. At this point, I'm not aware of any presentations, Mrs. Wagner.
No presentation.
They can't see it anyway.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to public comment on agenda. We have 2.
Correct.
The first will be one that was submitted by Barbara Bose.
Yes.
She submitted several questions. Mrs. Wagner will read the questions as well as the answers.
So these are from Barbara Bose. She submitted this, I believe, this morning or this afternoon. Under financial matter, she questioned Bruegel music parents, Carbon County music
Note time.
educators.
There's no
These
time.
events be held, will there be a refund if they are canceled or have they already been canceled? And the answer is a request for
shut everybody's
reimbursement
camera
will be
off.
submitted for events that have been canceled due to the COVID-19. And then under that same one, there was also a Schuylkill League Athletics for $100. And she asked, is this for 2021 school year or for the current school year? And this was related to the 1920 fall winter sports season. And then Ms. Bose questioned the electric bills for January middle school old stadium was $118.88. New stadium is $5,647.69. Electric bills for February, middle school old stadium was $107.39. New stadium was $4,369.20. She says, I'd like to see a motion to winterize the new stadium going forward
Looks like they shut everybody's camera off.
as soon as any state events are over for the year. We were lucky, I guess, that this was a warm winter or the electric bill could have been much higher. Given the district's financial status, this seems to be plain common sense. And the answer is, this has been discussed and reviewed by the Building and Grounds Department. The Building and Grounds Department will be reviewing options with the Building and Grounds Committee at the next committee meeting in May. And then Mrs. Bose asked, why is there a negative $29,284.56 to BHA for February? Were they overpaid or is this a credit? The answer is the negative is not a credit. It is required to accounting entry to correct the accounting on the invoice. An amount was charged to a 500 object code when it should have been charged to a 300 object code. You will see the negative dollars in object 563, but then the amount is appropriately charged out to the 300 object codes in accordance with the school code. The 563 object codes is non-public tuition. BHA is not a non-public school as defined and approved by PDE. Cost to BHA under school code must be charged to a 300 object codes. Professional educational services. Intermediate unit costs are also charged to 300 object accounts. And then three more questions. What is the expense being paid to Jim Thorpe Area School District of $5,542.50? The first amount seems to be from the 16-17 school year, and the second amount is from the 17-18 school year. Please explain these expenses. The answer is the fees relate to tuition charges due as per school code that provides that Lehighton must pay tuition to another district if another district is educating one of Lehighton's students. The tuition relates to the 2016, 17, and 17, 18 school years. Invoices could relate to a prior school year for a number of reasons. For instance, if a student cannot be properly acknowledged as an LASD student, the tuition bill is not paid until the student is appropriately acknowledged. Another question is, since Portnoy apparently collects fees for the collection of overdue taxes from the homeowner, why are we paying them $20,739.47? Or do we contract with them for other services? The answer is the fees relate to fees required to properly mail the required notices, excuse me, of delinquent payments. These amounts are reimbursed to the school district when taxpayers pay Portnoy the delinquencies due. Another question, have any of the checks included in these documents been sent out already or invoices paid? And if so, under whose authority? As is, the answer is, as is, and has always been the standard operating procedure. Certain invoices are paid between board meetings, and the payments are placed on the next available board agenda. Utilities left unpaid would be shut off if not paid timely. Other invoices may face a late fee if not paid timely. Those would be payments that would be sent out between board meetings. This is not a new procedure. LASD and other districts routinely operate this way for utility and other payments to prevent late fees or shutoffs. And then there was a question under agenda item 11, programs. Is there a plan in place or being discussed for graduation if CDC guidelines still include no large gatherings? This will be answered under the superintendent's report. And that's the end of Barbara Bose.
Thank you, Mrs. Wagner. I believe we have one other courtesy of the floor. That would be Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. We go on to communications. Mr. Cleaver, superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stern. I would like to begin by thanking the entire Lehighton educational community for their patience and understanding during this new educational setting that we are all experiencing. The staff has been working diligently in all areas to make the transition to a digital platform. We have been working in the final phase of the transition, which is planned instruction, and the teachers and entire educational staff have been working together to meet the needs of all our students. If parents and our guardians have any questions or concerns moving forward, they are encouraged to reach out to their child's teacher or building administrator. Again, thank you and thank everyone for their patience and understanding during this difficult time. We have been continuing to serve meals for the students of Lehighton School District, and I wanted to send a special thank you to our cafeteria staff. They have been preparing over 300 meals daily for the past several weeks and have been either handing them out at the elementary center or delivering them locations through the Lehighton community. Also, we would like to thank Leon George from George's Transportation for assisting us with deliveries. I'd actually like to recognize the cafeteria staff by name who have been so diligently working and preparing these meals and doing a fantastic job for our students. Dave Kubasek, who's our food service director, Mona Laura, Kelly Kohler, Sylvia Quigley, Sharon Hinkle, Dana Snyder, Dolores Pell, and Herth Andrew. If you see these individuals out in public, I would ask you to say thank you to them because they are doing a great service for our students and have been here every day preparing these meals. As part of the planned instruction process, the administration team has handed out over 500 technology devices for students to assist them in continuing their education at home and virtually. A special thanks to our technology department for preparing all the devices and assisting us as we continue to move forward in this educational process. If you have any questions regarding the technology device you received from the district, please visit our website, and you could also email us at lasdapps@lehighton.org. Again, that email is lasdapps@lehighton.org. The school district is continuing to make plans to honor our students in class of 2020. The annual academic awards and scholarship recipients will be honored and announced virtually. In addition, our top 10% students will be honored and recognized via all social media outlets and our school district websites. Graduation has been discussed and several options are being reviewed. The district plans to recognize the entire senior class for their achievements and will continue to develop plans for graduation that follow all CDC and Department of Health guidelines. All information will be released from the district and other district-related social media outlets. The Lehighton High School now has an Instagram page, Lehighton Class of 2020, which will feature seniors and their plans post-graduation. You could also view our senior athletes on the athletic Twitter page, where they are being recognized, a male and a female, every day. And I'd like to spend this special thanks to the high school staff and the group working together to make this a possibility with the media notifications. Please continue to visit the district website for updates and information as we move forward with addressing the current COVID-19 pandemic. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. I will go on to solicitor's report.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bradley, that email was, or that letter was requested to share with the board, and that is what I've done. Mr. Bradley, that request was made to share with the board. If you wish to share it with other individuals, that is, on you. No, sir, that is correct.
Nothing was left off. The information is in the FYI packet, according to Mrs. Wagner. Oh, it's not on the agenda. It's as information in your packet.
Mr. Bradley, the request was to share the letter with the school board, and that is exactly what we did. We honored her request. Thank you. And I have no further comment on the situation.
Okay, we're moving on to solicitor's report, which I have checked with Mr. Feiler, and there is no actual solicitor's report for this particular meeting. We're going to move on to the approval of minutes. I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the February 24th, 2020 regular meeting.
So moved, WENTZ.
Second, Rita Spinelli.
So a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Beltz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
No.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So I have 5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent, motion carries.
We'll go on to financial matters. I need a motion and a second to approve Lehighton Area High School and Lehighton Area Middle School activities funds for February and March, enclosure number 2.
So moved, Steve Holland. Second by Nathan.
I have a motion by Mr. Holland, a second by Mr. Fuller to approve the middle school and high school activities funds. Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Beltz, absent, Mr. David Bradley,
You can make your comment, Mr. Bradley. You may make your comment prior to your vote, Mr. Bradley. Yes, we can hold the discussion. Thank you. We will redo the vote. Are there any further comments? Since there's no further discussion, I'll move on to a roll call vote. I don't believe anybody really has to answer you if you question another member in the meeting. Ms. Wagner?
Okay, roll call vote for activities fund. Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
No.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So that's 5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
We'll move on to the approved payment of bills. I need a motion and a second to approve the payment of bills for February and March 2020, enclosure number 3. General fund, $3,913,986.54. Benefits, $30,761.37. Payroll, $2,695,017.76. Debit card, $65.41. Food service fund, $243,239.17 for a total of $6,883,070.25. I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Wayne Wentz.
Second, Steve Holland.
Discussion on the bills? Discussion on the bills, Mr. Bradley, go ahead.
What? You do realize you're unmuted. You muted.
I reviewed the 45 pages of bills that were in our packet today, Mr. Bradley. Did not see any out of the ordinary charges from unknown sources, and that is how I reviewed the bills. Thank you. Just told you I reviewed the 45 pages that were in our packet. I have no further comments, sir.
I've reviewed everything to my satisfaction.
My satisfaction.
I've answered your question. I don't have any further comment. I said I have no further comment. Larry, if there's no further discussion, let's call the question.
Okay, I have a call to question. Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay, roll call on payment of bills. Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
No.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
Okay, 5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
Mr. Cleaver, would you please advance the agenda? Thank you. I need a motion and a second to approve the following reports: expenditure reports, expenditure by object report, revenue summary, treasurer's reports, which include the general fund, capital reserve fund, capital projects fund, and food service fund. I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Rita.
Second,
Second by
Steve.
Nathan.
I have a motion and second on item C, discussion. You have the floor, sir.
No.
You're, Mr. Bradley, those reports have been the reports that have been written out of our accounting system and delivered for the past 18 months or so, or maybe not 18 months, but at least the past 14 months since Ms. Denicola has been here. Mrs. Champ, I believe it is, assists her in creating all of those reports. I believe your fact that your fact there is erroneous because those aren't all created. There's some that are created by typed up balance sheets. Others are reported out of the system, which have much further detail. Thank you.
Thank you, honey.
What we need.
Mr. Stern, this is Rita Spinelli. Please call the question. We've heard this many times before. I repeat, Mr.
Okay.
Stern, please call the question.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Bradley. Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay, this is for reports. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley? Mr. Nathan Fuller?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland?
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik?
No.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli?
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz?
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Larry Stern?
Yes.
That's 5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent, motion carries.
On to motion D, or item D. I need a motion and a second to approve the exemptions from the per capita and or
Excuse
Go ahead and
me.
mute yourself.
Just a reminder that the background noise, if we could, if you're, not talking, maybe mute will help, but there's a lot of background noise and I want to make sure everyone could hear everyone correctly. Thank you.
And as a useful tip, if you have your microphone muted, when you press the space bar on your computer, your microphone will go off mute for the amount of time that you have the space bar pressed. So again, on the motion D, item D, I need a motion and a second to approve the exemptions from the per capita and or occupational per taxes per the attached list in closure number 5. Motion and a second, please.
so moved. Steve,
Second, Wayne.
I have a motion by Mr. Holland, a second by Mr. Wentz. Discussion points on this item? Hearing no discussion, roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner?
Sure. Roll call on exemptions. Mr. David Bradley? Was that a yes? Okay. Mr. Nathan Fuller?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland?
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik?
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli?
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz?
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. Larry Stern?
Yes.
So that's 7 yes, 2 absent, motion carried.
Thank you, Mrs. Wagner. On item E, I need a motion in a second to approve the 2021 capital and operating budget of the Lehigh Carbon Community College, resolution number 19//20-02 as recommended by the Finance Committee. Motion in a second, please.
So moved, Rita.
Second by Nathan.
So I have a motion by Mrs. Spinelli, a second by Mr. Fuller. Discussion, please. Any further discussion? Roll call. Is the second or the first willing to rescind the motion?
No.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner, for the approval of the operating budget for 2021 for the Lehigh Carbon Community College.
Okay. Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers absent, Mr. Richard Belts absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I have 6 yes, 1 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
On to item F, I need a motion and a second to adopt the 2021 proposed operating budget for the Carbon Career and Technical Institute, resolution number 19/2020, number 3, as recommended by the Finance Committee. I need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Wayne.
Second, Rita.
A motion by Mr. Wentz, a second by Mrs. Spinelli concerning the approval of the operating budget for the Carbon Career and Technical Institute. Discussion?
Mr. Bradley, I'm on the Finance Committee. I've discussed this budget with both the business manager from CCTI and our business manager, Mr. Nicole, and it was discussed at the Finance meeting. So it's here recommended for our approval. I discussed the budget. That's the motion that's here, is the budget. That's what I discussed.
No further discussion. I'll call for a roll call vote. Please, Mrs. Wagner?
Not off the top of my head. I'm sure that information is available. It's been available this entire time. Not the specific number, no.
Mr. President, please call the question. This is badgering.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner, please.
Okay, so this roll call is on the CCTI budget. Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Belt, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So that's 7 yes, 2 absent, motion carried.
Mr. Cleaver, could you please advance the agenda? Thank you. On to item G, I need a motion and a second to adopt the 2021 proposed general operating budget for the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit number 21, resolution number 19/20, number 4. Motion and a second, please.
So moved, Rita.
Second, Wayne.
I have a motion by Mrs. Spinelli, a second by Mr. Wentz. Call for discussion on the approval of the operating budget for the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit. That information, that is not stated on the agenda, Mr. Bradley. I believe we did get the information on the IU 21 budget in our packets last week to review and to ask questions should we had any prior to the meeting.
Yes, this information was reviewed. The IU also shares it with the superintendents and breaks it down. It's also shared with biz managers, and they put their packet together and is shared with the board for approval of their budget. Yeah, well, again, this is the discussion. If you look on page 7 of your enclosure, you'll see that is just their overall operating budget. That does not get, shared with the district as far as the cost of it, because it is a service provider for us. So you can look and see that our increase has gone up $186 from $26,269 to $26,455. So that is the contribution that is being approved with this motion. Yes, Mr. Bradley, if you would look, you could see on the bottom of that page that I referenced that it's based off the market value aid ratio, the way their formula works. So that is also the reason why some go up and some go down. It's based on that aid ratio. That is
Mr. Stern, again, I'm going to ask that you call the question because apparently Mr. Bradley comes unprepared. He always has questions, even though the information is given to him in his packet. He does not need to question individual board members, their integrity or their motives. Please call the question. Mr. Stern, please call the question. I too have opinions on who should resign and who's not doing their job, but right now the question is at hand. Please call it.
Thank you for the discussion points. I call for the roll call vote for the CLIU 21-19-20 or 2021 budget.
Okay. Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Beltz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, okay, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So I have 6 yes, 1 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
You very well know who that representative is, Mr. Bradley. I'm not going to allow you to badger anyone further on it. Thank you very much. No, you very much know who it is, so I'm asking you to please refrain. Yeah, you are unprepared because you are unprepared. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. On the item H, I need a motion and a second to accept the donation to the general fund of $100 from Griff's Ale House and Grill to be used for Title I reading program at the elementary center. I need a motion and a second, please.
Second.
I believe that was a motion by Mr. Bradley and a second by Ms. Spinelli. Is that correct?
Correct.
Discussion on the donation from Griff's Ale House and Grill? My input would be we continue to thank Griff's Ale House for their support of the Title I reading program. I believe this is probably the 4th or 7th time this month or this year that they've donated to the Title I reading to help our children advance their reading skills, and that's much appreciated, especially for them through this period of time with the COVID-19. They haven't had their business open as much as they have certainly would have liked to in the past 2 months. So we really much thank them for their support. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? I'll move on to roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay. Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Beltz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
Okay, so that's 7 yes, 2 absent. Motion carried.
On the motion, item I need a motion and a second to approve the intergovernmental agreement for special education services for the 2021 school year with the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit number 21, enclosure number 7. Motion and a second, please.
So moved, Wayne.
Second, Steve.
Discussion on these services or this approval? Hearing none, we'll move on to a roll call vote. Mrs. Wagner?
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Beltz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes, thank you.
7 yes, 2 absent, motion carried.
Mr. Bradley, go ahead. Which item are you addressing, Mr. Bradley?
In relation to special education services, we do often use Kingsborough.
I'm kind of unsure of your question, Mr. Bradley, because we do use our King Spry services where it's related to special education issues. I believe that statement references the CLIU attorneys, not the ones that are on the supporting districts. And that would be King Spry, as we said before, sir. You know, since it's special education, it would be King Spry. First of all, your chuckling is not amusing. Second of all, there are times when Mr. Schwab's office, Attorney Schwab's office, does reference backup materials and support through King Spry's office.
Again, Mr. President, this is Rita. Please call the question. This is enough.
We are not even on a motion. We're in between a motion. I'm going on to motion J, or item J. I did answer your question. There are times when you're paying both offices of the solicitors, whether it's King Spry and Attorney Schwab's office. Depending on the circumstances, it necessarily is appropriate. On to item J, I need a motion and a second to approve the confidential settlement agreement with and release 56975. Need a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
I have a
by Nathan.
question.
We didn't have a motion and a second yet, Ms. Holland.
I'll second it, Steve.
Okay, who was the first, please?
Nathan.
Thank you very much. So I have a first by Nathan and a second by Mr. Holland. Discussion on this item. Thank you.
I'm wondering what we're doing so this doesn't happen again to another child.
Again, all the information was summarized by the schools or by our solicitor. That information was shared with the board. Of course, our goal is to, not have any situation happen to where, this type of settlement needs to be handled, but regarding this situation, there is a recommendation, and there are no pending cases at this time, knock on wood.
I have heard from parents that there is a difficulty in getting the school district to come up with an IEP for some students when the parents feel they're needed, and they have to jump through hoops to get an IEP for their child. And if this would have been done in the beginning, we wouldn't be looking at this $64,000 settlement. Is there anywhere on our website a information on exactly the steps parents need to take to get an IEP for their child?
Yeah, there's a process, and there is information on the website that they could go through and how it handles. Just because they want one doesn't necessarily mean they're guaranteed one. There is a process, legally that has to go through. And there is times where there is disagreements with it, and that's where the team comes together and tries to work together for the best interest.
Well, I'm just kind of wondering how this child got slipped through the cracks like this.
You're right, Mr. Bradley. I know you like to be right, so I'm going to let you be right now. Please call the question, Larry.
And I agree with that, Mr. Bradley. And one of the things, and I think probably Mr. Cleaver can second this on my statement as IEPs. I'm not asking him the second, he's gonna, Mr. Bradley, please don't interrupt. I think Mr. Cleaver and any of the special education group within the schools will support the numbers that I'm saying is in the majority of the cases that occur from an IEP perspective, it is our instructional staff that identifies the issues with the students and refers those students for further testing to see if an IEP is warranted to support their educational process. I'm going to call the question now. Thank you very much. Roll call
I
vote,
have
Mrs.
another
Wagner.
question. No, wait, I have a question. I have a question here. I'm wondering where the class staff members that missed out on this IEP, were they taken aside and retrained so that this doesn't happen again?
Again, we have many training, many professional development opportunities for our staff. Again, there's situations where perhaps, you know, a parent doesn't agree with the recommendation the school is making, or, you know, the team as a whole, and they may go and get other opinions as far as an independent evaluation, and that, you know, plays a role as well too. But at all, you know, at all times, you know, our staff is always continuing to be trained, you know, to handle these situations.
Larry, this is Rita. Please call the question. This is getting dangerously close to giving out more details than we are allowed to give out. Please call the question.
When did we name a child? Really?
And you don't know what you're talking about because you are so far off on this, you have no idea. Please, Larry, can we move on? There is no educating you.
Thank you very much. Discussion. We'll go on to roll call vote. Mrs. Wagner, concerning the settlement for this student. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard,
The recommendation is based off the information you received from our attorneys, Mr. Bradley.
can I continue? Mr. Richard Phelps? Roll call. Mr. Richard Phelps? Absent.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Phelps, absent. Mr. David Bradley? Mr. Nathan Fuller?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland?
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik?
Not working. Oh, there it is. No, absolutely not.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli?
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz?
yes,
Mr. Larry Stern?
For the sake of the student, yes.
So 5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
On to personnel. Item A, I need a motion and a second to approve the following request for pre-approval of course of study for continuing education's items 1 through 6. Need a motion and a second, please.
so
Can we
moved,
please
Wayne.
see the agenda?
Mr. Cleaver, could you advance the agenda, please? Thank you. I have a first by Mr. Wentz. I need a second on the motion to approve the following requests for pre-approval course of study for continuing education 1 through 6.
I'll second it, Steve.
Discussion on this, on item A. No. This is contractual.
Yes, that is. The administration makes his recommendation. These are all contractual and follow the professional contract guidelines.
I made the motion, Larry. Could we move on, please?
Mr. Bradley, these are courses of continuing education that are contractually obligated to the professional staff of our district. The courses and the courses of study are approved by the superintendent's office, whether it be Mr. Cleaver or Mr. Tack or I believe those would be the two that would do the approval of the course of study. Okay, roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Mr.
I have a
Richard
question.
Phelps?
Yes, Ms. Mahalik.
I would like to know if some of the teachers might be able to come to some of the board meetings and give us an update on some of these seminars, because they sound interesting. If they just give us a few minutes and explain what they learned at some of these things, it would be interesting to know that. I totally agree. Knowing the cost would be helpful. Although that probably wouldn't change my vote.
We could include the cost for the classes, because depending on whether they're level 1 or level 2 does play a role, because they are different rates. And if it's an IU course versus a state institution, it could be a different rate too. So moving forward, we can include the cost for these courses.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay, Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Fuller.
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland.
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik.
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli.
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz.
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So that's 7 yes, 2 absent, motion carried.
On to item B, I need a motion and a second to acknowledge the FMLA leave for the following employee not to exceed 12 weeks. Employee number 395, effective February 18th, 2020. Need a motion and a second, please.
So moved, Steve.
Second by Nathan.
I have a motion by Mr. Holland, a second by Mr. Fuller. Any discussion on this, on item B? Hearing none, I will call for a roll call vote. Mrs. Wagner.
Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Fuller.
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland.
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik.
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli.
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz.
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
So that's 7 yes, 2 absent, motion carried.
On to item C, I need a motion and a second to accept the resignation of the following employees. Ashley Shannon, part-time cleaner, effective March 6th. Tavia Cardell, Title I reading specialist, effective March 13th, 2020.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Bradley and a second by Mrs. Spinelli. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any discussion on item C? Go ahead, Mr. Bradley.
Mr. Bradley, as required by the legislation, all hired employees for the district are being paid,
Full-time employees.
and part-time if they're approved. We do have a rotation that individuals are below CDC guidelines, yes.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Belz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
7 yes, 2 no, motion carried.
On to item D, need a motion and a second to accept the intent to retire for the following employee under terms of their respective contract with eligibility and all retirement benefits. 1, Nancy Cook, Secretary, 30 years of service, effective June 30th, 2020. Motion and a second, please.
so moved. Steve,
Second, Rita.
I have a motion by Mr. Holland, a second by Ms. Spinelli. Any discussion on this intent to retire?
I would like to thank Nancy for, for her service and the information that she provides with us on a daily basis with, activities reports and those things. She does a great job also, with athletics and, assisting in the high school office. So she will be, greatly missed by many. She does a fantastic job for us.
I echo those sentiments exactly, Mr. Cleaver. Any further discussion?
At this point, all individuals who are retiring are being evaluated to see how they will be recommended as part of the budget moving forward.
Roll call, Ms. Wagner.
Okay. This is on retirement. Mr. Stephen Holland,
yes,
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes, with regrets.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes, and Nancy did a great job. Appreciate all she done.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Belz, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes, and I'd like to thank her for her service.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
Okay, 7-2, motion carried.
On to programs. I need a motion and a second to approve graduation to be held tentatively on Friday, June 5th, 2020.
So moved. Wayne.
Second, Rita.
I have a motion by Mr. Wentz, a second by Ms. Spinelli. Discussion, please. That's why it was said to be tentative. Graduation is just a ceremony? Ah, what a comment.
This is a graduation date that'll be listed, so the students will be graduating on this date, June 5th, 2020. How that graduation looks may, of course, be different, depending on the CDC and the government and the requirements that we have to abide by. At this point, though, we are setting the date for there will be some type of recognition for our students on Friday, June 5th. Again,
Larry, I'm sorry, but these kids deserve it after 13 years in our district. They deserve something, some kind of graduation. Don't listen to him, please. These kids deserve a graduation.
they will be getting recognized at graduation. That is correct. Our students, as far as our plan instruction guidelines, our students are still being assigned and responsible for completing work up into and including June 5th, the day of graduation for our seniors. Depending on the individual circumstance of that student, I cannot answer that. That's a case-by-case basis.
Larry, could we call the question? This is nonsense. Let's go. Well, you can't even say it.
Again, this is setting the date for graduation, and that concludes my comments regarding this motion.
Thank
you.
Okay, I have a roll call vote. Please, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay, for graduation date, Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beer is absent, Mr. Richard Belt's absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
Okay, 7-2, motion carried.
I do have a question, though. What is the last day that the children are going to be using computers and having classrooms in the elementary and middle school?
Friday, June 5th is our scheduled last day for the education for our students.
Thank you.
That is for everyone, Gail.
Great. I was told to ask that question by a family member.
On to item B, we need a motion and a second to approve the Lehighton Area High School 2021 Program of Studies enclosure number 8.
So moved.
Second by Nathan.
I have a motion by Mr. Spinelli, a second by Mr. Fuller to approve the 2021 Lehighton Area High School Program of Studies. Discussion, please.
This is the recommendation from the administration in the high school for their students to be able to, as they move forward in the programs that they'll be offered.
Yes, I believe this was presented at the Academic Affairs Committee meeting back maybe 2 months ago or so.
Yeah, it was a few months ago.
Yes, Ms. Holland presented this to the academic committee.
Yeah, I absolutely, with the support of our administrative staff at the high school, I absolutely recommend that we move forward with these program of studies as defined by Mrs. Holland that night. I believe there was a very lengthy discussion on the opportunities and the benefits of changes in the credit structure to allow the students to have a more flexible and more open way of exploring some of the different educational opportunities at the high school. I did not. Mr. Bradley, did you provide any input to Mrs. Holland on this particular document? It's not premature, as the schedules are being completed for the 2021 school year in the next couple of months. And that information needs to be programmed into the system so that students can enroll in appropriate class to meet their program of studies requirements. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Wagner, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Rita
I do
Spinelli?
have a question. I know we went to a different form of scheduling last year. I'd like to know how that worked for the high school.
Yes, we were continuing with that same schedule setup that we currently had. Of course, with the new schedule, there was some hiccups. They worked through it. I got to give credit to the staff and the administration at the high school working through it. It was something new for everyone. And of course, something new, we had 800, approximately 800 students and approximately 100 staff members. It was all new for them, but moving forward, we're, hoping that it continues to be successful, giving our students opportunities. But I'm not going to say it was, perfect, that there wasn't adjustments that had to be made, but they were made. And like I said, I have to give credit to the entire staff there for, for making it work for this school year.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Mahalik and Mr. Cleaver.
Again, many of them have been addressed. And I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm saying that everyone is 100% happy. But overall, we continue to work through it to the best interest of the students and giving them, again, additional educational opportunities. The program of studies is the coursework, not necessarily the schedule. Again, these are the courses that are being offered. I don't know that the complaints are necessarily about courses being offered, as it was, concerns about the schedule and the process.
Any further discussion? At this time, I don't believe it has a budgetary impact.
Again, these are courses that are being offered. As far as that, the budget, the supplies, and those things that are required for the courses will all be, part of the budget. And again, they're, to put an amount on that. Again, this is just a program of studies. If courses are not filled, or if there is little or no interest in them, those courses will not run, which will in turn then open up possibly another class for that individual employee or staff member to offer.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay. Mrs. Rita Spinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz,
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent, Mr. Richard Belts, absent, Mr. David Bradley, Mr. Nathan Fowler,
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland,
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik,
Yes.
and Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes.
5-6 yes, 1 no, 2 absent, motion carried.
No items under new business. I will move on to section 8, director's concern. Mr. Bradley, you have the floor. Mrs. Wolf asked that,
I
Mr.
second
Bradley,
it.
Mr. Bradley, Mr. Bradley, Mr. Bradley, if Mrs. Wolf appends that document to say that it can go to the public, we can put it with the information from this meeting, since it is addressed to the superintendent and to board members, not to the public. I feel that'd be a violation of her privacy if that would occur. Thank you. We can, we cannot make a motion.
I'll second it.
I have no, any discussion on this motion?
Having read the letter, I would offer the sentiment that it did not appear to me that she wanted the letter to be shared with the public. She specifically stated why she sent the letter to the board rather than coming to a board meeting and speaking publicly. So I'm ready to vote.
Mr. Stern, we have a motion in a second, so we would need to allow comment.
Yes, thank you. Is there any comment, not only from the board, I guess, but from, I guess we did hear the comment from the board, but from the attending public?
I do have one. I will allow Ms. Bose, can you hear?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please. Again, just a reminder, that you are, being, heard by the individuals, also the panelists and the attendees.
I understand that. My question is this, is the solicitor in this meeting?
The solicitor is part of this meeting.
Does he have a recommendation on this question?
I haven't reviewed the letter. I've not reviewed the letter, so I don't have a recommendation.
I just don't know if there's any private information included with names or whatever, having not seen the letter.
Okay. Is that it, Ms. Bowes, regarding this motion?
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I have Ms. Bowman now requesting to comment.
I'm not sure how I feel about this. I would go with, yes, it would be okay to read, but it would certainly have perhaps been something that the person who wrote it would have been contacted and asked prior to the board meeting, especially if someone had planned on asking for it to be read.
At this time, I do have another one. Miss Gloria Bowman is requesting.
Okay, I'm done.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I personally, I think that Mrs. Wolf should be asked if she wants to share that publicly, if it was not specifically stated in her letter, except to share with the board. I think out of common courtesy to her, and I think to protect her own privacy, I believe that she should be asked before you go ahead and read anything. And there's no reason why, if that is followed through, that you cannot do that in another board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have another individual, Chrissy Marinick. I'm putting her on now. Are you able to hear us, Chrissy? Are you able to hear us, Chrissy?
Yes, I can hear you. I just wanted to say that I agree with Mrs. Bowman because the original letter said she wanted it shared with the board. So I do not support sharing it any other way, no matter, without checking with her.
Thank you. I do have another individual, Mr. Fred Kemmer. Mr. Kemmer? Mr. Kemmer?
I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, sorry. Real quick, in the letter, she stated that she had a problem speaking in public, is that's what I gathered from Mr. Fuller. So the sheer fact that she sent a letter to express what she wanted to express to the board and the public, I assume, my thought is that the only reason that she didn't want it shared by her is because of speaking in public in the comment.
Thank you. At this time, we have
Was that supposed to be in our packet?
At this time, we have no other comment.
I don't have it. I don't have the letter. I don't have a copy of the letter.
It was in the FYI packets, Ms. Mulholland. It was not part of the board agenda. That's why it was in the FYI packet.
Yeah, the FYI packets were emailed.
Is there any other comments, Mr. Cleaver? Mr. Cleaver, are there any other comments concerning this from the attending public?
I do have one comment from someone who has not commented regarding this, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith?
Can you hear me?
Yes, is Mr. Smith?
Yes. I'd just like to say that throughout this whole meeting, I've heard phone noises, and every time that happens, Miss Rita's audio pops up. So I would just like to make the comment that if Miss Rita has, other previous engagements or someone else to talk to, instead of pulling her full attention to the meeting as she should as elected official, then she can go do that.
Okay, again, this is for motion regarding to letter.
I'd like to comment, Mr. Cleaver. I'm sitting in a room all by myself. There's nobody here. There's nobody with me. I've been here the whole time looking at the agenda and paying attention. Just FYI.
Mr. Cleaver, I'll make a recommendation that while we're discussing this, that you can reach out to Mrs. Wolf and see if she would like that information placed publicly up with the packet on the website. If she so chooses, we will do that for her. If she doesn't, then that will not be placed on the website. Based upon her instruction to the superintendent and to the board, I feel that is appropriate action.
Again, we have a motion and a second from Mr. Bradley and Ms. Mahalik.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner. Please explain what the motion is first.
So I have the motion by Mr. Bradley, seconded by Mrs. Mahalik, to have the secretary read the communication from Betty Wolf. Okay. So we'll do a roll call. Mr. Wayne Wentz?
Yeah, I've known Betty all my life, and out of respect to Betty, who's done great things, been a volunteer for years, absolutely not until we get the okay from her.
Okay. Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley? Mr. Nathan Fuller?
No.
Mr. Stephen Holland?
No, I think our administration should reach out to this person and find out her true concerns and how she wants it to go about. Thank you.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik?
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli?
No.
Mr. Larry Stern?
At this time, no, since it was directed to the superintendent and the Board of Education only. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 2 yes, 5 no, 2 absent, motion denied.
Okay, Mr. Bradley, we'll move on to director's concerns. You have the floor, please.
I think we should extend the pay date until December 31st and give everybody the discount period. I would like to make a motion that we give the entirely heightened community an opportunity to have their taxes not due until December 31st, and then they should be able to pay the discount amount. All the school district taxes that we are in charge of.
So I have a motion by Mr. Bradley, a motion by Gail Mahalik, and a second by Mr. Bradley to extend all taxes that are levied by the Lehighton Area School District to have a due date of December 31st, 2020. And the discount period be extended throughout the entire until December 31st, 2020.
Exactly.
Discussion?
I do have comments from the participants. I will now, Ms. Bowman is on.
I believe I just read that the property tax bill has been frozen in legislation. So I don't think it's the individual school districts can extend that without legislation support. I believe I also read that the spring taxes discount for your counties, which includes per capita, your township, and your county, has been extended, and I don't recall the date for the discounted price, but I know that has been extended. The other one I know has been frozen.
I do have another one from Ms.
And exactly what does frozen mean? We pay what we're paying this year. Last year, we pay this year. That's not exactly the same thing as having a discounted period until December 31st. Totally different.
Okay, I do have another comment from a participant, Ms. Barb Bose. Ms. Bose?
Yes. I have to agree with Dave Bradley here. That was what was put out, that it was the individual school districts that would make that decision. And it has been allowed for them to do so.
Thank you. No further comment.
I'll make a comment. Since this motion was just put on the agenda at this evening, I think this is something that really should be discussed in the Finance Committee to see the eventual impact on what the change would have on our financial situation throughout the 2020-2021 school year. I do realize, as we all do, this is a challenging time, that some folks aren't working, some folks are working. We understand that. But what we have to address is, what is the impact on the district? And it should come up through the Finance Committee, with that impact being displayed or actually explained to the board from a financial perspective, and what that would cause the district to have to do to keep itself solvent throughout the 2021 school year.
Well, I know it would mean
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Bradley. These are discussion topics. So that's what we're doing. We're discussing them. And I'm discussing my opinion.
We have an exceedingly large amount of families that are not working right now, and that just might allow them to stay in their home. And that's really what is important to me.
Mr. Cleaver, are there any further comments?
At this time, I see none. They just popped up. You are correct. I do know they did comment on this motion already. But Mr. Kemmer, well, I don't believe he commented on this one. Mr. Kemmer?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, real quick, I do agree with Larry. There does have to be a little bit more exploring as far as the financial burden on the school district. But I do agree that if the county and is going to extend it a bit, we might have to just see if we could follow suit with what the county's doing initially and see if that would work for the school district. But I agree that the finance of the school district needs to be taken into account. And the comment.
Thank you. I do have Barb Bose. Ms. Bose?
All right, my main concern is chances are you won't be having a finance meeting prior to the May 31st deadline for the 2%, anyway, this information has been widely put on the news. Everyone should have known this was an option. And perhaps it should have been discussed to some degree or should have been looked into by the board members prior to this meeting. But the discount period, I don't have an issue. I'm working. Boy, am I working. And being paid extra. So it's not an issue for me, but it's going to be an issue for a lot of people in this district.
There is a scheduled finance meeting. And also, just a reminder, our board meeting is scheduled for May 18th because of the holiday next month.
Any further comments?
There is a motion and a second on.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to extend the dates out to December 30th, 2021 with the discount. Roll call vote, Mrs. Bradley, Mrs. Wagner.
Ms. Joy Beers, absent. Mr. Richard Belts, absent. Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Fuller.
No.
Mr. Stephen Holland.
I'm gonna vote no, but my question is, could we not wait for this till after we have our finance meeting and it's brought up in the May regular board meeting? That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Gail Mahalik.
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli.
No, for the same reason Steve pointed out.
Mr. Wayne Wentz.
Yeah, if there's anything we can do to help our taxpayers, I'm all for it. But if the finance committee approves this, absolutely. But right now I'm voting no.
Mr. Larry Stern.
No, at this point, the same as I said in my statement, we need to evaluate it from a financial impact to the district. Thank you very much, Mrs. Wagner.
Okay, so it's 2 yes, 5 no, 2 absent, motion denied.
Mr.
I'm
Bradley,
not surprised.
your item number 2, Mr. Bradley? Mr. Bradley, could you please add some clarity to around what document you're not getting? I believe the information on the website was all the invoices that were supported by the bill payment this period. Is that what it's in relation to, or is there other documents that you're seeking that we somehow don't have access to? So there's motion failed for no second. Mr. Bradley, you can continue. Motion fails for lack of second, and I believe, Mr. Bradley, according to what I know about the right to know that you have put in for that documentation, it is being processed in accordance with the right to know office. Well, there's okay, thank you, sir. Do you have any other topics? Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I believe that motion fails for lack of second. Let's all move on to the next section. If there is courtesy of the floor, Mr. Cleaver.
Yes, I do have Ms. Barb Bose would like to comment. Ms. Bose?
Okay. I did have my hand raised on the discount period a second time, and it should not have mattered if I had commented already, because someone else's comment made me want to speak again. So I don't deny Fred having the opportunity to comment, but I should have not been denied a second comment. And that's all I'm going to say. I understand that, and I will not pursue it, but going forward with virtual meetings, it needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mrs. Bose. We'll keep that in mind as we move forward with these virtual meetings. And I appreciate everybody's actual support of this process during this evening. It seemed to have gone over fairly successfully. So again, I appreciate everybody's input. Is there any other courtesies to the floor, Mr. Cleaver?
This time I see none.
Okay, I will take a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, it's Rita.
Second, Wayne.
Any discussion on adjourning the meeting? Roll call vote, Mrs. Wagner, to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Richard Boutz absent. Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Nathan Fuller.
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Holland.
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Mahalik.
Yes.
Mrs. Rita Spinelli.
Yes.
Mr. Wayne Wentz.
Yes.
Ms. Joy Beers absent. Mr. Larry Stern.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wagner.
7 yes, 2 no to adjourn the meeting. 2 absent. Okay.
All right, again, thank you all for participating. It's our first real live virtual meeting. As we stated earlier, we did have a test of connectivity for our board last week with no action. So moving forward, we will be advertising other committee meetings as well, which will be virtual. And we don't know at this point if our May 18th meeting will be virtual, but I'm probably going to assume so. So thanks again for participating. I hope you all had a pleasurable experience with the registration process and to supporting this this very important meeting this evening. So thank you very much, and you all have a good night.